Other issues on this segment of Forgotten History.
Okay. That's why we all didn't get taught in school. Like no.
Some groups deny the Irish slavery under English and later British rule, claiming that this was nothing more than voluntary indentured servitude, which did exist. However, counter arguments that will be challenged here. There is a legitimate dispute as to the numbers enslaved, especially during the 17th century before the Act of Union of
That was around the time
1707.
of the famine.
The official British
famine.
legal terminology used was indentured servants. Whether the servants in question had willingly signed the indenture contract to emigrate to the Americas or were forced to go. Many were forced. Therefore,
if you
those
were poor.
transported unwillingly and effectively sold were not considered to be indentured. This included political prisoners, vagrants, convicts, political activists, thieves, prostitutes, or people who had been defined as undesirable by the English government. The Irish introduction to slavery was during the first Viking raids in the year 795, lasting through the mid-9th century. This period saw the Irish killed and enslaved. Just like many other societies, the Vikings attacked. Most of these early raids were along the northern and eastern coast using hit-and-run tactics. The Vikings would then flee with treasure and slaves and return to either their holdings in Scotland or back to Norway. Usually, many slaves who were of value were ransomed back to their families, but others remained in captivity. Then, from the year 837 onward, larger targets such as the greater monastic towns of Armagh, Glendalough, Kildare, Slane, Clonard, and Clonmacnoise, and Lismore were hit by larger forces. These large-scale raids generally spare the smaller local churches far inland, but slaves were still taken, mostly to Scotland and Iceland. In 875, Irish slaves in Iceland launched Europe's largest slave rebellion since the end of the Roman Empire, when Hrólfr Hallmarson's slaves killed him and fled to Vestmannaeyjar. In 841, the port that became known as Dublin was taken and occupied by both Olaf and Ivar the Boneless. And by 853, this part of Ireland was a Norse trading center, and slaves were a large part of it. The slave trade did not stop with Ivar's death in 873. Finally, in 902, driven out of Dublin by the combined forces of Brega and Leinster, but the Vikings came back in 914 and reclaimed all the territory, taking more slaves. But Irish resistance was not over. In 980, the Irish, under Mael Sectional Mac Domhnall, king of Meath, fought and managed to defeat the Vikings and freed all of their slaves. Some Vikings who remained assimilated and adapted to Christianity and became part of Irish society. The coffin regarding Vikings holding land and taking slaves was in 1014 at the Battle of Clontarf, when Brian Boru, High King of Ireland, attacked Dublin, aided by his allies, the Limerick Vikings. They fought other Irish allied to the local Vikings in Dublin. Boru's force won, and all the slaves were again freed, thus ending the legacy of constant Norse raids, whether from Danes or Norwegians. The period of forced enslavement and severity ended a century after the Norman invasion of England in October 6. Subsequent Norman rulers of England eyed Ireland, and slavery in its true form was abolished in 1102. In 1155, Pope Adrian IV supposedly gave Henry II of England a papal bull, granting the king the authority to invade Ireland. However, many historians believe that this authorization was a forgery. Regardless, Henry of Canterbury, so it is possible. However, Adrian's successor, Pope Alexander III, granted the lands of Ireland to Henry II, although it was not his land to give. The Norman conquest and Ireland were cataclysmic events that would shape Ireland's as well as world history and create tensions with England for the next 800 years. The Normans were initially invited to Ireland by Dermot MacMurrough, the deposed king of Leinster. He is sometimes referred to as Dermot of the Forest, and his grandmother was the granddaughter of Brian Boru. In October 1171, King Henry II landed in Ireland and allowed Dermot to recruit soldiers and mercenaries, as Ireland was made up of several kingdoms at war with each other. The city of Dublin and the surrounding area were under Norman occupation and would be considered foolish, hence the term we use today, going beyond the pale. But the Normans ended the practice of slavery in Ireland, but not serfdom, for at least a few
That's
hundred years. Despite the Norman abolition of slavery, serfdom
sorry. Going beyond the pale. The pale was Dublin. Like that was the safe zone. If you went outside of that, like there was all kinds of nasty shit you didn't want to deal with. But
was alive
really,
and well. Serfs were, unlike slaves, bound to the land, and the land meant everything. So selling people into slavery would have left no one to farm and conduct agriculture. Following the Battle of Kinsale in 1601, when the Irish and Spanish was defeated, the Irish
like,
aristocracy
what's actually crazy, like, is another thing. Some some of the Irish people supposedly, I don't know if it's true or not, sold themselves into slavery. So
fled to Europe,
like,
but the commoners remained, and they left a power vacuum filled by English nobles. Reports vary, and the numbers are in dispute, but the high number is that English forces had 30,000 captured Irish and Spanish soldiers. Other sources say half that number, around 15,000, engaged, with 7,000 to 8,000 being captured. The Spanish allies were allowed to leave, but not the Irish. In 1603 or 1604, King James I of England, crowned on March 23, 1603, reportedly issued the order of banishment. This allowed those Irish captured to be sold, a permanent banishment. After nearly a decade, the king gave instruction for the English governor general to collect and sell the captured Irish soldiers as slaves and send
how
them
y'all
to the New
doing
World
today? I
in
hope
the
you're all doing
Americas.
good.
In 1612, the first recorded Irish slaves were sold, possibly to the Portuguese, and taken to the Amazon River basin in their modern-day Brazil. This brought them to the New World. There has been some dispute as to whether these people were
And
indentured
look
servants
how,
or
like,
slaves, but it is
malnourished
clear that they
they
were
are.
forced out of England to
Because
the New
famine,
World, so it seems illogical and ridiculous to assume that they went voluntarily, hence the status of slaves. It has been chronicled that in 1625, James I's son, Charles I, issued the decree, and it may be
it's
possible before his death in March 1625, but
started
given the
getting more.
timeline of his death, it would appear that his son, Charles, probably did issue the royal decree authorizing the Irish slaves. This included prisoners captured, those to be common criminals, and rabble-rousers who were sold. They were property of the English plantation owners in the North American colonies. As a result, tens of thousands of Irish men and women were sent to the Eastern American colonies, as well as Guyana, Antigua, and Montserrat. As well, between
That's why, as well, in Jamaica and the Caribbean, you have a lot of Irish blood. And America, of course, like, has a lot of Irish Americans.
1629 and 1632, as other Caribbean locations over the next few decades were infiltrated, but the exact number may never be known. By 1637, approximately 69% of the population of Montserrat were Irish. Many were indentured servants, yet some were slaves.
Why
The
weren't we
rationale
taught
was
this in
simple.
school?
Black slaves had to be purchased at a cost of around 20 to 50 pounds
It's
sterling, a huge sum of money in those days. However, Irish slaves were sold for 900 pounds of cotton per person, but also traded for tobacco and indigo in a straight barter system. It would appear that the Irish then became the largest source of slaves for English slave traders and plantation owners
that's
at that
crazy.
time, far surpassing the African slave trade until the early
That's because the Irish were skin and bone, no muscle, and skins were big and strong, so they went for more. It was during the famine, the Irish famine.
to mid 1700s. Between 1641, during the Irish Rebellion, to 1652, it has been stated that over 550,000 Irish were killed by English forces and 300,000 more were sold as slaves, mostly military aged men. Their children, especially women and girls, were sold and considered quite valuable in the domestic service role. The greatest perpetrator of
Yeah.
this was Oliver Cromwell, who defeated Charles
Uh,
I in 1649 during the English
I
Civil
hate,
War and had him executed.
I hate,
Cromwell, as
and
Lord
everything's
Protector,
good.
waged a ruthless war against the Irish, starting in 1649. By 1650, it is claimed that nearly 29,000 Irish were sold to planters in St. Kitts. During the decade of the 1650s, it is also claimed, as well as disputed, that around 100,000 Irish children, generally from 10 to 14 years of age were taken from their parents and were also sold.
Damn, so how many 40,000 children? Imagine like how many families that's breaking up and their parents are probably taken then as well.
And sold themselves also as slaves or indentured servants in the West Indies, Virginia, the Carolinas, and New England. It is also claimed that between 1651 and 1660, the Irish slaves far outnumbered the colonists in all areas. In 1652, Cromwell ordered that 12,000 Irish were to be sold to Barbados, and those numbers are not in dispute, only status. On 1 May 1654, his "To Hell to Connacht" proclamation was issued during the
Yeah,
Act of
that's right.
Settlement of 1662. This was when the English
The
began
hell
confiscating
about-
all Irish-held lands, and the native Irish were relocated west of the Shannon River.
Sorry,
Those
sir.
who resisted were sent to the West Indies as slaves or executed. His own words proclaimed, quote, "Those who fail to transplant themselves into Connacht or County Clare within 6 months shall be attainted of high treason, or to be sent to America or other parts beyond the seas. Those banished who return ought to suffer the pains of felons by virtue of this act without benefit of clergy." End quote. The English could kill the Irish without penalty, but seldom offered great properties of Barbados and Virginia, but again cannot verify the exact numbers. Many argue that these were indentured servants, not slaves, yet there are no records of contracts between those forcibly removed and their benefactors. Item for workers
Jesus.
that these deported
Like,
Irish were,
fuck
in
that,
fact,
come
slaves.
on.
In 1656, the
They're not gonna
Council of
keep
State
record of this
ordered the roundup of 1,000 Irish girls and 1,000 Irish boys in their
Slave-
early
slave
teens,
trade, man, like.
even some children, to be rounded up and sold to Jamaican planters. These numbers are in dispute, but do
That's
seem
all.
reasonable, as these would be children whose parents were already
And,
deported.
Jersey,
Part
like,
of this order was an
Jamaican
edict
for red
passed
hair
on
and
October 2nd, 1665, which stated, quote,
the Irish scene.
"Upon report of Committee for America concerning proposals for transporting persons from Long Island to Jamaica to confer with the Committee for Jamaica," end quote. The persons were Irish, and no indentured servant would be released to go to Jamaica. These had to be forcibly exported Irish who were already present in New York. In fact, some of the English receiving these Irish slaves seemed rather concerned. Hence this following report, quote, "Commission appointing Cornelius Holland, Colonel Owen Rowe, Sir Thomas Roth, and 14 others accompany by the name of the governor and company of the city of London for the plantation of the Somers Islands, to take into consideration the present condition of those plantations, many well affected persons there having been much oppressed and unjustly dealt with in relation to matters of conscience." End quote. Whitehall, 1653, June 28th. This situation, with the forcibly removed Irish not being a people to take subjugation lightly, appeared to have created the fear of an uprising, and this seems to be explained in the Whitehall document from November 18, 1656. Quote, "The Council of State, Captain Wilkinson, importance of the Somers Islands to the interest of the Commonwealth. Supposition that the Spaniards will endeavor to get a footing there. Doubtful that a principle of disaffection may yet be retained by some of the inhabitants. He is encouraged to attend to his duties as commander of the fort, to keep a vigilant eye upon the malignant and discontented party, that they may have the less opportunity to prejudice the island's safety, and to use his best endeavors to secure the interest of the Commonwealth." End quote. Referred to the Irish population that must have been slaves, and they feared an uprising. No reason to worry about indentured servants. So, whether one accepts the reality of Irish slavery or not, the fact remains that there were Irish people forced into slavery. However, the exact numbers may never be known. We hope you enjoyed this segment of Forgotten History. Please click like and subscribe for free. And please stay tuned and be engaged and informed. Send us comments if you have questions or even show ideas, and we will